It was the winter of 1940, and northern France shivered under the relentless weight of occupation. The villages, once vibrant with the hum of daily life, were now silent under the shadow of German control. Roads that had once carried farmers' carts and children's bicycles were clogged with convoys of German trucks, their engines rumbling through the frost, leaving black trails on the snow-dusted countryside. Railways, the veins of transportation across the nation, were patrolled by armed soldiers whose boots struck the sleepers with mechanical rhythm and whose eyes searched for the smallest hint of resistance. Bridges, those fragile arteries connecting one town to another, essential for the movement of supplies and soldiers alike, were being destroyed almost as soon as they were built, blown to splinters by retreating armies or sabotaged by resistance fighters seeking to slow the enemy's advance. Among the chaos and fear, one man refused to surrender to despair. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Henri Delmas, 43 years old, a former farmer whose hands had once coaxed life from stubborn soil and tended to the irrigation canals of his land, now carried the weight of a nation's hope on his shoulders. Stripped of his farm, his son deported to unknown lands, and his wife dead from illness, Henri walked through the snow-covered streets with a purpose that no hardship could shake. He did not move out of vengeance, nor from anger, but from a profound sense of duty. In the ruin of France, he saw not defeat, but opportunity, a chance to build something that could change the course of the war. Across the occupied countryside, Allied intelligence was desperate. Reports poured in daily of destroyed bridges and blocked roads, slowing the advance of convoys, stranding supplies, and leaving soldiers vulnerable. The Allies faced an urgent need for bridges capable of supporting the heaviest tanks on the battlefield. The Churchill tank, weighing 40 tons, posed a particular challenge. Its massive steel frame, while formidable against German firepower, threatened to collapse any ordinary bridge it crossed. Even the American Sherman tanks, though lighter, could buckle traditional constructions if the span was too long or the supports insufficient. The engineers of the era had relied on conventional designs, steel frameworks of calculated strength, and temporary wooden trusses. Yet these could not withstand the pressures of a modern battlefield, where vehicles of unimaginable weight rolled across fragile spans. Every bridge destroyed meant delays measured in hours, sometimes days, during which the tide of war could shift. Supplies could not reach the front lines, reinforcements could not arrive in time, and countless lives were placed at risk. Henri saw what others did not. Where the engineers saw scrap and failure, he saw raw potential. Where the Allies saw a logistical nightmare, Henri envisioned a solution. Late one night, under a moonless sky that rendered even familiar landmarks foreign and shadowed, Henri wandered through a local junkyard. The yard was a graveyard of industry, rusted beams jumbled together like broken teeth, discarded trusses leaning precariously against the skeletal remains of old factories, and twisted girders scattered like fallen giants. Most people would have called it debris, worthless remnants of a forgotten age. Henri, however, saw opportunity. He ran his gloved fingers along the corroded steel, feeling its strength beneath the flakes of rust, imagining the hidden resilience that lay beneath its worn surface. Each beam, each girder, whispered a story of endurance. If repurposed, he believed, this junkyard could provide the foundation for a bridge unlike any Europe had ever seen. He carried scraps of paper in his pocket, sketches torn from notebooks and letters from home, and began to draft ideas in the dim light. His calculations were done by hand, pencil tracing curves and angles, sometimes smudged by the cold or the grease on his fingers. He imagined panels that could carry tanks, artillery, and hundreds of soldiers simultaneously, all without bending, cracking, or failing under the stress of movement. The design that emerged from Henri's mind was deceptively simple, yet revolutionary. It relied on modular steel panels salvaged from abandoned factories, bent, cut, and reinforced to create a continuous, resilient span. Unlike traditional bridges, which demanded cranes, heavy machinery, and specialized construction crews, Henri's concept could be realized by a handful of men working under the cover of darkness. 6 soldiers, equipped with nothing more than wrenches, hammers, and determination, could carry, assemble, and secure the panels across a river or ravine. Every joint, every rivet, every crossbeam was calculated to bear incredible loads. Even steel that had once been discarded could be forged into a structure of unimaginable strength. Henri drew upon lessons learned from his years on the farm, techniques used to reinforce irrigation gates and barn frameworks, methods for distributing weight across imperfect supports, and ways to improvise when materials were scarce. By combining ingenuity with necessity, he was creating a bridge that could not only survive the passage of armoured vehicles, but also resist the inevitable wear and sabotage that war would bring. The beauty of Henri's idea lay not only in its practicality, but in its adaptability. Each panel was designed to fit together like a puzzle, interchangeable and replaceable. If one section bent under load or suffered damage, it could be swapped out without dismantling the entire structure. The bridge could be extended, shortened, or modified depending on the demands of the terrain. It could span wide rivers or cross narrow ravines with equal efficiency. Its components were light enough for men to carry individually, yet once connected, they formed a structure capable of supporting tons of weight. Henri imagined it being rolled into place under the cover of night, sections connected one by one, until a fully operational bridge stretched across a river, ready to carry men, tanks, and artillery into the fray. As Henri sketched late into the night, he envisioned the day when the first armoured vehicle would cross his bridge. He imagined the groan of steel under immense pressure, the vibrations rippling through each panel, and the bridge absorbing the weight without complaint. The thought filled him with a quiet determination. For Henri, this was more than engineering, it was an act of defiance, a contribution to the liberation of his homeland. If successful, his bridge could alter the course of battles, delay enemy movements, and save countless lives. Each rivet he calculated, each beam he measured, was a vote against surrender, a refusal to allow France to remain shackled under occupation. Over the following weeks, Henri worked tirelessly. Daylight was spent scavenging steel, negotiating with sympathetic factory workers, and measuring river widths and current strengths. Nightfall was devoted to design, calculation, and assembly practice. Luc Morel, a former mechanic from Rouen, joined him, bringing a steady hand and deep understanding of how metal behaves under stress. Luc could repair any machine, from a broken tractor to a damaged truck, and his experience in welding and metalwork proved invaluable. Together, they tested connections, hammered out weak points, and experimented with various arrangements of panels. Each failure taught them something new. Sometimes a panel bent too easily under simulated weight, other times the clamps loosened unexpectedly. Henri adapted every lesson, ensuring that the final design was resilient, flexible, and capable of withstanding the unpredictable realities of wartime use. André Vasseur, a 22-year-old university student, joined the team, providing the mathematical expertise Henri lacked. He calculated load distributions, stress points, and the angles of trusses, refining Henri's sketches into a plan that could be replicated consistently. With André's calculations, Henri was able to confirm that a single panel, even made from uneven, rusted steel, could support the passage of multiple armoured vehicles if reinforced properly. The modular design allowed them to compensate for flaws in the material, using geometry and clever arrangements to distribute weight evenly. Claire Lemoyne, the courier, played a crucial role. Her knowledge of the local terrain, German patrol schedules, and clandestine pathways allowed the team to move materials undetected. She delivered tools, brought intelligence from Allied scouts, and guided the men across fields, forests, and riverbanks under cover of darkness. Her presence ensured that the bridge could be assembled in secret, without alerting the enemy to their activities. The combination of Henri's vision, Luc's craftsmanship, André's calculations, and Claire's resourcefulness formed a team capable of achieving the impossible. The first prototype was constructed in a secluded meadow near the river. Using scrap steel and improvised tools, they assembled a section of the bridge and tested it with loaded carts and heavy weights. The results were promising. Panels flexed under load but returned to their original form, rivets held, clamps tightened as designed. Henri allowed himself a small smile. This was only the beginning, but the foundation of something extraordinary had been laid. They had proven that what others considered junk could, in the right hands, become the strongest bridge in Europe. Each night, as they worked, Henri reflected on the scale of what they were attempting. The world beyond the meadow seemed indifferent to their efforts, yet he knew that every panel they connected, every joint they reinforced, was a potential lifeline for soldiers, civilians, and the future of France. The bridge would not only carry tanks and men, it would carry hope. It was a symbol that ingenuity, courage, and determination could triumph over scarcity, occupation, and despair. Henri often whispered to himself, "Steel is strong, but it bends. Men make it unbreakable." That mantra guided every decision, every calculation, and every sleepless hour spent under moonlight, surrounded by rusted steel and the quiet of winter fields. By the end of the first month, the team had perfected the design. They had created a modular bridge, assembled from scrap steel, reinforced to support the heaviest vehicles, and designed for rapid deployment under enemy observation. Henri's vision, once a simple sketch on a scrap of paper, had become a reality. The bridge could be transported in sections, rolled into place, and assembled in a matter of hours by 6 determined men. It could withstand the weight of tanks, artillery, and supply convoys, all while being nearly invisible to enemy scouts when constructed at night. Henri's ingenuity had turned desperation into opportunity, scrap into strength, and fear into courage. And so, under the cold winter skies of 1940, with the fields silent and the rivers flowing under ice, Henri Delmas and his team prepared to take their creation to the battlefield. What began as a vision of necessity had become a bridge capable of altering the course of war, a testament to human ingenuity, and the first step toward building the most indestructible bridge in Europe. The nights ahead would test their resolve, their skill, and their courage, but Henri knew one truth: no steel, no matter how twisted or rusted, could resist the will of men determined to change history. No engineer, no matter how brilliant, could have built such a bridge alone. Henri Delmas understood this from the beginning. His vision for a modular, indestructible structure required not just skill, but teamwork, courage, and ingenuity. He began recruiting a small group of experts and dreamers, men and women who had already been scarred by the war, but who still carried the fire of determination. Luc Morel, a former mechanic from Rouen, was the first to join. Luc had spent years repairing tractors, trucks, and even small farm engines. He could take apart a broken machine under fire and make it run again, often using nothing but scrap metal and ingenuity. He was gruff, practical, and rarely spoke more than necessary, but Henri knew that Luc's hands alone were worth a dozen men in terms of skill and resourcefulness. Next came André Vasseur, a young university student of 22, whose mind was sharper than most professors he had studied under. André's talent for mathematics and physics was indispensable. He could calculate load distributions and structural stresses with a precision that made Henri's sketches seem like rudimentary blueprints. While Henri envisioned the bridge as a living concept of steel and modularity, André translated it into numbers, formulas, and measurements that could be tested, refined, and repeated. His youth brought energy and daring to the group, but also a nervous excitement. Often, when a heavy beam groaned under his calculations, he would flinch and mutter, "It shouldn't bend that way," only for Henri to calmly point out how the design compensated for uneven steel and hidden weaknesses. Claire Lemoyne, a courier of extraordinary courage, completed the team. She had spent the past 2 years dodging German patrols, delivering coded messages through fields, forests, and villages, always under the guise of a simple milkmaid. Her knowledge of the local terrain, enemy patterns, and clandestine pathways made her indispensable. She could navigate rivers and roads in darkness with a precision that left even seasoned soldiers in awe. Claire would coordinate logistics, move materials to hidden assembly sites, and warn the team of approaching patrols. ensuring that their work could proceed in secret. Together, Henri, Luc, André, and Claire formed a team as unlikely as the mission itself. Each brought skills the others lacked, and each carried an unspoken understanding of the stakes. The first task was scouting the site where the bridge would ultimately be assembled. The location had to meet strict criteria. It needed to span a river wide enough to block enemy reinforcements, yet be accessible under cover of darkness. It needed solid banks for anchoring the panels, and it needed to remain out of sight from enemy patrols and observation posts. After days of careful reconnaissance, Henri selected a destroyed railway bridge near Caen, a structure half collapsed by retreating German forces. The river beneath it was swollen from recent rains, its currents unpredictable and violent. The banks were lined with trees and reeds, offering natural concealment. Yet enemy patrols were frequent, making precision and stealth paramount. Henri gathered the team in a small clearing near the river and unfolded a tattered map. "We will work at night," he explained, his voice steady. 6 men, 30 panels, 2 hours. One mistake, and the bridge collapses along with us. His gaze swept across their faces. "We must move like shadows, and each of you must know exactly what to do." That night, the fog rolled in thick and low, hugging the fields and concealing their movements. The team began gathering steel from derelict factories and abandoned scrapyards. The work was grueling beyond imagination. Rust flaked into their eyes and noses, leaving trails of red and brown dust on their clothing. Rivets that had held up machinery decades ago were bent or missing entirely, forcing them to improvise clamps and reinforcement pieces on the spot. Beams that appeared manageable were often heavier than anticipated, requiring the strength of 2 men to carry a single section without strain. Luc, wiping sweat and rust from his forehead, joked to ease the tension. "It's like fixing the old farm wagon, if the wagon weighed 30 tons and the Germans were watching." Tense laugh from André, who was nervously checking the stress lines on a bent truss, and a nod from Claire, who had no time for jokes but appreciated the levity. Each panel they salvaged had to be carefully tested. Henri had built a rough prototype months earlier, and it served as a template for the team. Panels were reinforced, rebent, and sometimes even cut down to fit the truss pattern Henri envisioned. Each joint was scrutinized. Every bolt, rivet, and clamp was examined for strength. Henri demonstrated to the team how to assemble the panels in a truss-like formation, a pattern he had designed to distribute weight evenly and prevent sagging. "If a Sherman rolls across," he said, his eyes gleaming, "it won't even notice." Skepticism rippled through the group. Steel from junkyards, rusted and warped, reclaimed from derelict buildings and broken machines. How could it possibly hold the weight of a heavy tank? Yet Henri's calculations were precise. His confidence was unshakable, and gradually the team's doubts were replaced by cautious faith. The work was physically demanding, mentally exhausting, and emotionally taxing. Hours stretched into nights, and nights blurred into cold, misty mornings. André would often sit cross-legged in the mud, sketching load patterns and angles, his pencil smudged by grease and dirt. Luc lifted and aligned beams in the darkness, the sweat freezing on his face as he muttered under his breath about the stubbornness of old metal. Claire moved swiftly between them, carrying tools, measuring tapes, and lanterns, ensuring that no panel was misplaced and that no one strayed too close to the enemy's patrol routes. Henri oversaw every hesitation, move, correcting mistakes silently, adjusting angles, and testing connections with his bare hands to feel for weaknesses. Each evening, they would step back, exhausted but satisfied, and inspect the work so far. The modular sections began to take shape, a bridge rising from the remnants of industry, each panel a testament to ingenuity, perseverance, and courage. The ingenuity of the design became increasingly apparent as construction progressed. Henri had conceived the bridge as a modular system, where panels could be added, removed, or replaced, without affecting the stability of the entire structure. This flexibility allowed them to work with materials of varying quality and size. A slightly warped beam could be reinforced with a smaller truss. A missing rivet could be substituted with a clamp, and still maintain structural integrity. The bridge, though constructed from scrap steel and salvaged materials, was becoming stronger than most conventional bridges of the era. Henri demonstrated this by loading sections with carts of sand, weights, and even farm equipment borrowed from sympathetic locals. The panels held, bending only slightly and returning to their original shape. The team began to believe that what they were building could truly withstand the stresses of war. During these nights, Henri also imparted lessons that went beyond engineering. He taught the team to trust one another implicitly, to communicate through subtle signals, and to anticipate problems before they arose. Luc learned to check André's calculations for practical feasibility. André learned to appreciate Luc's hands-on adjustments that no equation could predict. Claire, often in the shadows, became the eyes and ears of the operation, guiding the team through treacherous terrain and ensuring their safety from enemy observation. Henri emphasized patience and precision, noting that one mistake could collapse the bridge before it ever served its purpose. Under his guidance, the team began to operate as a single unit, their individual skills merging into a cohesive force. By the second week, the team had assembled a partial bridge in their secluded testing area. The trusses, reinforced and precisely aligned, formed a structure capable of supporting remarkable weight. They tested it with loaded carts and improvised weights to simulate tanks crossing. Each successful test bolstered their confidence and reinforced Henri's belief that the bridge would perform even under the extreme conditions of battle. Even the most skeptical members, like André, who had doubted the feasibility of using Junkyard steel, were forced to acknowledge the brilliance of Henri's design. Luc, usually stoic, allowed himself a satisfied nod, recognizing that the fusion of mathematics, mechanics, and raw courage had created something extraordinary. Throughout this period, the team faced countless challenges beyond the technical. German patrols frequently moved near their worksite, forcing sudden retreats and the relocation of panels. Weather was another adversary. Rain turned the fields into mud pits, fog obscured measurements, and freezing temperatures made metal tools almost unbearable to touch. Each challenge was met with ingenuity. Claire devised signal systems using lanterns and mirrors to warn of approaching enemy patrols. Luc invented makeshift sleds to drag beams across frozen ground. André adjusted calculations for thermal expansion and contraction caused by the cold. Henri coordinated the efforts, ensuring that every setback became a lesson rather than a defeat. By the end of the month, the team had fully embraced Henri's vision. 30 panels had been salvaged, tested, reinforced, and aligned in a truss formation that could support the heaviest Allied tanks. Each member understood their role perfectly. Luc managed construction and alignment. André calculated stress and load. Claire oversaw logistics and security, and Henri orchestrated the overall operation. The bridge was no longer just a concept. It had become a living structure, forged from discarded steel, hardened by cold nights, and held together by the skill and determination of 4 extraordinary individuals. On the eve of the first real test, Henri gathered the team near the river. The fog hung low, the swollen currents below murmuring their icy warnings. He looked at each of them in turn, seeing exhaustion, doubt, and hope reflected in their faces. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we see if our work can survive reality. Remember, every panel, every bolt, every truss depends on you. We build, we test, and we prove that steel, when guided by skill, can defy expectation." The team nodded silently, the weight of the mission settling over them like the winter night itself. They knew that what they were about to attempt was dangerous, unprecedented, and essential. The fate of their bridge and the lives it could save rested on their shoulders. And so, under the cover of darkness, Henri Delmas and his team of unlikely heroes prepared to bring their vision to life. They had turned discarded steel into hope, chaos into structure, and a dream into a tangible reality. With every panel lifted, every truss secured, and every rivet hammered, they inched closer to building not just a bridge, but a symbol of ingenuity, resilience, and the unbreakable human spirit. The actual construction began under conditions that could only be described as nearly impossible. The river, swollen with winter rains, churned beneath them like a living thing, its current carrying debris from upriver and slamming into partially submerged trees. The banks were slick with mud, and every step threatened to send a man or a panel plunging into the icy waters. Above them, the sky was heavy and low, thick with fog that sometimes concealed their work, but often made it impossible to see more than a few meters ahead. Enemy patrols were constant, moving along the roads, across, fields, and on the opposite bank of the river. Their boots crunched faintly in the mud, the sound magnified by the silence of anticipation. Occasionally, the distant thump of artillery shook the ground, rattling teeth and tools alike, a grim reminder that war was never far away. Yet, Henri Delmas and his team persisted. They carried each modular panel to the site with meticulous care, lowering heavy beams from sleds and dragging them across planks to keep them above the mud. Lanterns were dimmed to prevent detection, casting long, trembling shadows that danced across the riverbank, revealing glimpses of rusted steel and determined faces. Each section was anchored temporarily with wooden scaffolds, clamps, and ropes, then bolted together with pins Henri and Luc had forged in a blacksmith shop hidden in the woods. Sparks from hammering and welding flickered like distant stars, brief and fleeting, as though even the night itself conspired to shield their work from enemy eyes. One night, as Henri and Luc wrestled a particularly heavy steel truss into alignment, Claire, perched atop a ridge for surveillance, froze. German searchlights were sweeping the riverbank, their beams cutting through the fog in sharp, white arcs that made shadows jump across the mud. "They're coming," she whispered into the radio, her voice tight with tension. André, measuring a truss section for stress points, froze mid-measure, eyes wide, pencil hovering over his calculations. Henri, sensing the sudden panic, put a hand on André's shoulder. His calm was contagious, like a lifeline. "Keep moving," he said quietly. "Trust the steel, trust the design, trust yourselves." The words seemed simple, almost banal, yet they grounded the team, focusing their energy and calming the tremors of fear. In the dim light, they worked with a synchronized rhythm, steel panel by steel panel, section by section, constructing what would soon be recognized as the most indestructible bridge in Europe. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The brilliance of Henri's design revealed itself in the modularity of each panel. Panels, although sourced from junkyards, discarded factories, and derelict buildings, were carefully reinforced, bent, and tested to fit the truss system. If a panel bent or cracked under initial stress, it could be swapped out quickly without dismantling the rest of the structure. This meant that even under constant threat, the bridge could continue to grow. By the third night, half of the span had been completed. From a distance, Allied scouts observed the flickering lanterns, unaware of the ingenuity being assembled before them. They did not yet understand that this was no ordinary bridge. They were witnessing a structure capable of holding the heaviest Allied tanks, artillery, and thousands of troops, while remaining resilient under fire. Henri insisted on testing each section as it went up. Loaded carts, weighted to simulate the 40-ton Churchill and the 35-ton Sherman tanks, were rolled across the emerging spans. Some steel groaned and buckled slightly, a sound that made André wince, while other panels resisted with a steady, confident creak. Each response taught the team how to redistribute weight, reinforce weak points, and adjust the angles of trusses for maximum support. Luc, with his hands blackened with grease and rust, would tighten bolts and clamps on the spot, sometimes improvising braces with wood or additional steel scraps. André would adjust calculations, recording angles, force distribution, and deflection, making notes in mud-streaked notebooks. Claire moved swiftly along the bank, sometimes signaling through hand gestures or reflective surfaces when enemy patrols approached, guiding the team to pause, hide, or continue with minimal risk. The nights were long, cold, and relentless. Fingers cracked from the cold, tools became slippery in mud and sweat, and muscles ached from the repeated lifting of heavy steel panels. At times, Henri would stop the work, standing in the mud with his hands on his hips, surveying the bridge as it grew in the mist. He traced imaginary lines along the panels, imagining the tanks rolling across, the weight pressing down evenly along the trusses. "Look at it," he said once to Luke, his voice almost reverent. "Not a single panel wasted. Every piece contributes, every piece holds a story, and now they hold a purpose." Luke grunted, wiping sweat and rust from his eyes. "It's working," he muttered. "I'll be damned if it doesn't hold more than any bridge I've ever seen." By the fifth night, the team had developed a rhythm born of necessity and trust. Each man knew precisely where to be, which panel to lift, which truss to secure. Even in the face of danger, mistakes were rare. The bridge grew steadily, inch by inch, beam by beam. Henri emphasized the importance of patience. "Rushing," he explained, "will kill more than enemy fire ever could. Every connection must be perfect. Every weight must be balanced. The steel will not forgive carelessness." And indeed, every time a section was misaligned, it reminded them immediately. Panels would bow slightly, pins would refuse to seat properly, or the truss would wobble when loaded. Corrections were made, sometimes in silence, sometimes with terse words, always with precision. The ingenuity of Henri's modular approach became increasingly apparent as the bridge neared completion. Older, heavier beams were paired with smaller, newly cut panels to create a surprising elasticity. The structure could absorb shocks and vibrations caused by tanks rolling over it, by artillery blasts nearby, or even by thousands of soldiers marching in step. André's calculations confirmed what Henri had intuited. The steel, though repurposed, formed a lattice that redistributed weight in real time, making it nearly impossible to damage by conventional means. This elasticity was what gave the bridge its name among the team, the Indestructible. It was a bridge built from scraps, but it carried the promise of strength beyond imagination. One particularly harrowing night, as a storm rolled over the river, the team faced one of their most dangerous challenges. Rain poured in sheets, turning the muddy banks into treacherous slopes. Wind gusts bent young trees over the bridge, sending plumes of water cascading onto panels and soaking the team to the bone. André's calculations predicted slight shifts in the center trusses due to the weight of water and mud, and Luke struggled to realign panels while holding onto the slippery beams. Henri remained calm, directing movements with quiet authority. "Slowly," he said. "One panel at a time. The steel will not fail if we respect it." By dawn, drenched and exhausted, the team had managed to reinforce the bridge and stabilize the trusses, their faces streaked with mud and determination. The modularity of the design also allowed the team to work in shifts, an essential tactic to avoid detection. Claire would scout from the ridge, signaling when enemy patrols approached, while 2 men worked on one section and the remaining 2 prepared the next. This assembly line method allowed them to progress steadily without drawing attention. The bridge's hidden construction meant that by the time the Allies could observe activity, the bridge had already taken shape, and any delay for enemy forces would be nearly impossible. Henri smiled quietly to himself, thinking of how irony and strategy intertwined, using Junkyard steel to build a bridge capable of holding armies right under the noses of those who sought to destroy it. The culmination of their work approached during the 6th week of construction. The bridge was nearly complete, and the team tested it with everything at their disposal: loaded carts, horses pulling weight, and even empty tanks dragged carefully across sections to simulate actual deployment. Every panel, every joint, every pin proved its worth. The bridge flexed slightly under extreme stress, but always returned to form, absorbing shocks that would have destroyed ordinary structures. Henri stood at the riverbank, watching as the final sections were joined. He felt a quiet satisfaction, tempered by exhaustion and the ever-present awareness of the dangers still lurking. At last, under the dim glow of a crescent moon, the final panel was secured. The indestructible bridge spanned the river in a perfect, continuous arc. Its steel, once discarded and forgotten, now held the promise of life, movement, and hope. Henri, Luc, André, and Claire stepped back, muddy, tired, and triumphant. They inspected every inch, testing for stability, resilience, and weight distribution. Each test reinforced their belief. This bridge could hold the heaviest tanks the Allies possessed, withstand artillery fire, and survive repeated crossings without failure. Even the river, which had threatened to undo their work countless times, now flowed beneath the bridge, with barely a ripple affecting the steel. Its currents, once a threat, now highlighted the ingenuity of the design. The indestructible bridge had transformed from a collection of rusty panels into a symbol of human perseverance, courage, and intelligence. The team, exhausted but elated, realized that their work was more than just a bridge. It was a lifeline, a structure that could alter the course of war by enabling reinforcements, supplies, and hope to flow unhindered to the front lines. As dawn broke over the misty river, the first birds of spring chirped faintly from the trees along the banks. Henri watched the sunlight glint off the steel, and for a moment, the horrors of war receded. The bridge was complete. It was strong, resilient, and extraordinary. The team, dirty, bruised, and weary, allowed themselves a moment of quiet celebration. They had turned discarded metal into a miracle of engineering, forged under the shadow of war, and built not only a bridge but a testament to what determination, skill, and trust could accomplish. By the 7th week, Allied forces would begin to recognize the significance of this new bridge. It could carry every vehicle, every piece of artillery, and every soldier necessary to tip the balance in northern France. And all of it had been constructed in secret, under near constant threat of enemy discovery, with nothing more than ingenuity, courage, and the salvageable steel that most would have ignored. Henri Delmas's vision had been realized, and in the process, he and his team had built a structure that would endure both time and the memory of war. Dawn broke over the river like a pale promise, the first light reflecting faintly on steel that had been, only weeks ago, nothing more than discarded scrap. The winter sky hung, heavy and grey, a solemn witness to the culmination of weeks of labour, ingenuity, and risk. Henri Delmas stood at the edge of the indestructible bridge, boots sinking slightly into the mud at the bank, eyes scanning the span. Each panel glinted faintly in the dawn light, revealing the countless hours of effort, welding, bolting, and careful adjustments that had transformed twisted, rusted beams into a structure capable of supporting the weight of armoured vehicles. He could hear the river beneath, its swollen currents churning with a force that would have swept away any ordinary construction. Yet here it lay, steady and unyielding, a testament to human persistence in the face of overwhelming adversity. Around him, the team moved with nervous energy. Luc Morel, his face streaked with dirt and sweat, carried a toolbox filled with hammers, wrenches, and clamps that had become extensions of his hands over the past weeks. André Vasseur, the young university student who had once only calculated loads on paper, now knelt beside a panel, measuring deflections and recalculating stress points as if the life of the bridge depended on each precise observation, and it did. Claire Lemoyne, ever watchful, perched on a small rise beside the river, binoculars trained on the distant fields where German scouts could emerge at any moment. Her presence was both reassurance and alarm, a flicker of movement, a shadow across the frost-covered ground, and she would signal immediately. The entire team felt the weight of anticipation pressing down on them more heavily than any tank they would soon test upon the bridge. Henri stepped carefully onto the first steel panel, the sound of his boots echoing softly in the still morning air. Each step resonated through the trusses beneath him, a hollow yet confident note, like the heartbeat of the structure itself. He glanced back at Luc and André, who were positioned strategically along the span, and nodded. Luc raised his toolbox in silent affirmation, while André scribbled notes quickly, his pencil scratching against the mud-stained pages of his notebook as he observed minute flexes in the steel. The bridge had been reinforced overnight, additional pins placed at strategic joints, and tensioned cables tightened to ensure no unexpected bending would compromise the test. Henri's heart pounded in rhythm with the groaning of the panels under his weight, but every creak was a song of survival rather than a harbinger of failure. "It's holding," André murmured, his voice a mixture of disbelief and cautious admiration. "Better than I imagined." Henri allowed himself a small smile, the first in weeks that was not tinged with worry or exhaustion. This was a bridge built not for elegance, not for accolades, but for survival, crafted from metal that had once been discarded, transformed into a lifeline with nothing more than calculation, courage, and determination. The first Sherman tank rumbled onto the span, its treads crunching against the wooden planks that had been temporarily installed to guide the wheels over the steel trusses. The weight of the vehicle pressed down, and the steel groaned faintly under the immense load, yet it held. Henri could feel the subtle flex of the panels beneath him, each segment absorbing shock, distributing force along the trusses and returning to form. His eyes followed the tank as it moved slowly, deliberately, each meter a triumph of engineering and improvisation. The second tank rolled forward, heavier and laden with supplies. André calculated the stresses in real time, pencil scratching as he noted minor deflections that were well within acceptable limits. The panels flexed, bounced slightly, and then stabilized as the Sherman crossed entirely. Luke watched closely, ready to adjust any loose pins or braces, but none were needed. The third tank followed, a convoy of 4 in total, each carrying food, ammunition, and reinforcements that would be critical for the upcoming offensives. By the time the final Sherman reached the far bank, the bridge had demonstrated its resilience unequivocally. The modular panels, welded and bolted together under dim lantern light in enemy territory, had performed better than any of the team had dared to hope. Henri exhaled deeply, the sound lost amid the gentle rushing of the river beneath the bridge. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine the implications of their work. This bridge was not merely a structure, it was a weapon in its own right, a tool to alter the course of battle. With it, Allied reinforcements could reach the front lines without delay. Supplies that had been stranded behind destroyed bridges could now move unimpeded. The tanks themselves, symbols of industrial might, could traverse terrain previously thought impossible, turning the tide in sectors of northern France that had long been vulnerable. Each panel of steel, salvaged from junkyards and abandoned factories, now bore weight far beyond what Henri could have conceived on paper. The bridge, in its completed form, represented a marriage of necessity, intellect, and courage. It was a lifeline for the soldiers depending on it, and a monument to the human will to resist tyranny. Luke clapped a hand against a steel girder, the sound resonating like a victory bell. "Henri," he said, voice rough with excitement and exhaustion. "I can't believe it. This thing, it's more than a bridge. It's indestructible." Henri nodded silently, feeling the truth of Luke's words in his bones. Every rivet, every bent panel, every bolt and pin had contributed to a structure that was almost magical in its resilience. André crouched beside a panel, recalculating deflections for the final time, muttering figures under his breath as though speaking the language of steel itself. "Even with the heaviest tanks," he said finally, straightening, "it will hold. There is no load it cannot bear. It's perfect." Claire, watching from her perch, lowered the binoculars and allowed herself a rare, small smile. The threat of enemy discovery remained, but for now, their creation was secure, functional, and a triumph of ingenuity. The team conducted additional tests, deliberately overloading sections with carts stacked with sandbags and supplies far exceeding what a single Sherman tank would weigh. Each test was met with the same result. The bridge absorbed, flexed, and returned to its original alignment. The ingenuity of Henri's modular design revealed itself fully in these moments. Panels could be added or replaced without dismantling the entire span, and the elasticity of the structure allowed it to absorb shocks and vibrations from multiple heavy vehicles crossing simultaneously. This was a bridge designed not only to endure, but to adapt. The ability to repair or reinforce sections quickly, using only locally available materials, made it virtually indestructible by conventional enemy means. It was a concept that seemed almost fantastical. A bridge built from discarded steel, capable of supporting the combined weight of multiple tanks, artillery, and soldiers, and able to withstand repeated crossings without structural failure. As the morning progressed, Henri and his team began to coordinate with Allied units, signaling that the bridge was operational. Soldiers cautiously approached, eyes wide as they beheld the structure, and tanks rumbled across one by one, each crossing met with awe and relief. Henri walked alongside the final vehicle, noting how the steel panels flexed and absorbed the mechanical vibrations, ensuring a smooth and steady passage. Luc carried spare pins and clamps in case minor adjustments were required, and André continued to record every deflection, stress point, and vibration, knowing that the data would be invaluable for future construction of similar bridges. Claire maintained vigilance from the ridge, scanning the horizon for any signs of enemy reconnaissance, ready to alert the team at a moment's notice. The implications of the bridge were immediately apparent. Supply lines that had previously been stalled by destroyed bridges could now move freely. Reinforcements could reach positions that were once isolated. The flexibility, strength, and modularity of the design meant that repairs could be made in minutes rather than days, a critical advantage in the fluid and dangerous environment of northern France during the winter of 1940. Henri reflected on the ingenuity required to make this possible. The repurposed steel, the carefully calculated load distributions, the hands of his team that had worked tirelessly under threat of discovery and attack. Each panel was a story, each pin a symbol of perseverance, and each crossing a testament to their ingenuity and courage. By midday, the first convoy of supplies had successfully crossed. Tanks, artillery, food, and ammunition had all traversed the river safely, without incident. Henri allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction, watching soldiers disembark on the far bank, supplies in hand, ready to continue the fight. The indestructible bridge had proven itself in real time, under the heaviest loads imaginable, and under conditions that would have caused lesser structures to collapse. It was a bridge not only of steel, but of hope and resistance, a physical manifestation of the determination to reclaim and defend the land of France. The team paused briefly, standing together on the far bank, eyes sweeping across the expanse of the river and the bridge that spanned it. Luc placed a hand on Henri's shoulder. "We did it," he said simply, the weight of weeks of labour, fear, and tension finally translating into words. Henri nodded, acknowledging the truth in his companion's voice. Claire, still vigilant, lowered her binoculars and allowed herself a rare smile, the first since the initial planning of the bridge. André, usually reserved, allowed a moment of astonished delight to cross his face, eyes shining as he considered the forces at play and the mathematical elegance of the structure they had created. As the sun rose higher in the sky, glinting off the steel panels, Henri allowed himself to reflect on the broader significance of their work. This was not merely a bridge, it was a lifeline for Allied forces, a tool that would alter the flow of battle, and a symbol of what could be achieved when determination, skill, and courage were combined. Junkyard steel, once considered worthless, had been transformed into a structure capable of influencing the course of war. The indestructible bridge was a tangible manifestation of ingenuity, resourcefulness, and unwavering commitment to a cause greater than themselves. Henri and his team continued to monitor the bridge throughout the day, ensuring that each section remained secure and that no damage occurred during crossings. They documented everything meticulously, knowing that this knowledge could be replicated elsewhere if needed. The modular design, capable of rapid repair and expansion, meant that the bridge could serve as a prototype for future operations, allowing the Allies to maintain mobility across rivers that had previously been impassable. Each successful crossing reinforced their belief in the design, and by evening, the team could finally allow themselves a measure of relief. The indestructible bridge had passed its first test, not only with success, but with a degree of elegance and resilience that exceeded all expectations. It had borne the weight of tanks, supplies, and soldiers, absorbed vibrations, flexed without breaking, and adapted to the dynamic conditions of the river and weather. Henri watched as the last vehicle of the convoy crossed safely, a sense of quiet triumph settling over the team. In the shadow of war, with enemy forces only hours or days away, they had built not just a bridge, but a testament to human ingenuity and the indomitable spirit of resistance. Henri's thoughts lingered on the weeks of labour, the cold nights, the danger, and the ingenuity required to achieve what had seemed impossible. Each member of the team had contributed uniquely. Luc's mechanical skill, André's mathematical genius, Claire's vigilance, and Henri's vision and leadership. Together, they had transformed scrap into salvation, desperation into innovation, and fear into achievement. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, glinting on the steel, Henri allowed himself a small smile, knowing that the indestructible bridge would serve not only as a vital asset in the war, but also as a lasting symbol of what could be accomplished when necessity, skill, and courage converged. Word of Henri Delmas's bridge spread rapidly among Allied forces. By 1944, hundreds of Sherman tanks had crossed it, artillery had pounded its steel, and sabotage attempts had failed. Engineers marvelled at the modular design, patched, overnight, without cranes. The British experimental bridging establishment studied it, noting its adaptability and durability. General Dwight D. Eisenhower later listed such flexible bridges among the 3 most crucial engineering feats of the war. Decades later, historians recognized Henri and his team as unsung heroes. Their Junkyard steel bridge endured, a lasting symbol of ingenuity, courage, and hope forged from adversity. By the 1960s, Henri, now 73, returned to the bridge. The river flowed steadily beneath its steel panels, carrying cars, trucks, and pedestrians, unaware of its wartime origin. He ran his fingers along cold, worn steel, recalling nights of danger, clanging tools, whispered commands, and searchlights sweeping the riverbank. Tanks no longer crossed, but the bridge still bore weight with ease. Henri smiled, knowing Luc, André, and Claire were part of its story. Engineers and historians studied its modular, flexible design. His Junkyard steel creation endured, proving that courage, ingenuity, and necessity can transform the discarded into the extraordinary. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.